In this particular video, we're going to look at the histology of stomach. I've already made a video on histology of alimentary canal. The reason this video exists is so that you can learn the different types of gastric glands found in stomach and the different types of secretions secreted by those gastric glands. It might be possible that you may not understand the functions of the secretions that I'm going to mention right now, but that's all right because all these cells and their secretions are going to be repeated again under the physiology of digestion. That's where you will really understand the importance of these cells. But for now, try to grab as much information as possible. So let's begin. What I'm going to draw here is the typical diagram of a stomach. Okay, so this is the typical diagram of a stomach. Why am I drawing a stomach? To waste your time. So please skip the video. Okay, I messed up the pyloric region, but that's fine. Because what I really want to show you right now is the wall of the stomach. So this right here is a typical human stomach. Wait, is the camera working? Yes, the camera is working. So this is a typical human stomach. What I'm going to do is take a small piece from the wall of that stomach and zoom in. Why am I zooming in? So that we are able to study the tissues present in the wall of the stomach. That's the histology of stomach. From outside to inside, there are multiple layers in which the tissues forming the wall of the stomach is arranged. The outermost layer is called serosa. Let me draw serosa. So this is the outermost layer of stomach called serosa, and it is made up of simple squamous epithelial tissue. This is serosa. Right after serosa, there's the second layer, which is made up of muscles, and there are various types of muscles forming the wall of stomach. Generally, or throughout alimentary canal, there are two types of muscles found forming this layer. The outer longitudinal muscles, they are longitudinal muscles because they run in length. That's why they are called so. And the inner circular muscles. So the outer longitudinal muscle and the inner longitudinal muscle, they both together form the second layer called muscularis. However, in case of stomach, and only in case of stomach, throughout your alimentary canal, only in case of stomach, there's one more layer of muscle present right after the inner circular muscle, where the muscles are arranged obliquely, so-called oblique muscles. So what you have here is longitudinal muscle, what you have here is circular muscle, and what you have here is oblique muscle. All these three types of muscles together forms the second layer called muscularis. In between the outer longitudinal muscle and the inner circular muscle, you can find a layer of nerves, which is made up of sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. These nerves are present in the form of a mesh or network, and this mesh or network of sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves is called plexus. The plexus that is present in between the outer longitudinal muscle and the inner circular muscle is Urbach's plexus. If you think the lecture is going too fast, that's because I have mentioned all this information already in the video of histology of alimentary canal, so you can check it out before getting into this. Urbach's plexus. Right after muscularis, there's submucosa, which contains blood vessels and lymph vessels as well as nerves, and they are present in a loose connective tissue. So this is submucosa, which is present right behind mucosa. So obviously after submucosa comes mucosa. Mucosa itself contains three layers. The outer muscular layer called muscularis mucosa, which is made up of muscles. which also contains the longitudinal and circular muscles. The second, lamina propria, the composition of which is similar to that of submucosa. And finally, epithelial mucosa. Which contains epithelium. Okay, so here, this space is lamina propria. It contains blood vessels, lymph vessels, and nerves, and contains loose connective tissue. The wavy margin is lined by cells or epithelial cells which are present on a basement membrane, and these epithelial cells together they form epithelium. This whole layer is your mucosa. In stomach, the epithelial mucosa is composed of simple columnar epithelium. So the type of cells lining the basement membrane of epithelial mucosa are the columnar cells. These columnar cells are of various types and they produce various types of secretions. The mucosa is present in the form of foldings, and these foldings along with the epithelium forms glands. Since these glands are tubular in shape, they are called tubular glands. So throughout this diagram that I have drawn, all I want to say is your stomach is lined by different types of tubular glands. And these tubular glands, they are lined by secretory cells that are columnar in cells. These columnar secretory cells, they secrete various types of chemicals. What you need to know now are what are these different types of cells and what are the different types of secretions. So let's look at the various types of cells forming the wall of the tubular glands. Number 1, goblet cells. They are called so because they are shaped like a goblet. A goblet is a type of glass which is used to drink wine, alcohol, all that stuff. You can check it out in Google itself. Goblet cells are responsible for the secretion of mucus. Mucus forms the innermost lining of stomach. So innermost, there's a thick layer of mucus. It's important because inside stomach there's acid, and this acid can corrode the inner lining or the inner wall of the stomach. The inner wall of the stomach is protected from the action of the acid by this thick mucus layer secreted by the goblet cells of the epithelial mucosa. Number 2, oxantic cells or parietal cells. These cells are responsible for the secretion of number 1, hydrochloric acid. This hydrochloric acid forms the acidic content of the stomach. There are 3 major functions of hydrochloric acid. Number 1, hydrochloric acid maintains acidic pH inside the stomach because acidic pH is required for the digestion of protein inside the stomach. Number 2, HCl kills any germs or pathogens that somehow enters the stomach from outside. And number 3, HCl is responsible for the conversion of inactive proteolytic enzymes. Proteolytic, proteo refers to protein, lytic refers to lysis or breakdown, or protein breaking down enzymes into active form. If you don't get the functions, no worries, because all these functions will be repeated again under the physiology of digestion. For now, just understand the name of the cells and the secretions of those cells. Number 2, Cassell's intrinsic factor. Cassell's intrinsic factor is responsible for the absorption of vitamin B12 or cyanocobalamin. Without Cassell's intrinsic factor, which is secreted by oxantic or parietal cells, you can't absorb vitamin B12. For the absorption of vitamin B12, Cassell's intrinsic factor is complementary or necessary. Number 3, chief cells or peptic cells or zymogen cells. See, it's not difficult to learn the names of the cells because behind the name, there's a reason. These cells are called chief cells Because they perform the chief function of secreting proteolytic enzymes or protein breaking enzymes. These cells are called peptic cells because the proteolytic enzymes secreted by these cells are named pepsinogen. And these cells are called zymogen cells because the proteolytic enzyme, that is pepsinogen, which is secreted by these cells, are inactive. Zymogen are the inactive proteolytic enzymes. You can determine whether the enzyme is inactive or not through the spelling. That is, if at the end there's ozen, like pepsinogen, then it's inactive. Or pro at the beginning of the word, for example, prorenin, then it's inactive. So what are the inactive enzymes secreted by chief or peptic or zymogen cells? They are number one, pepsinogen, which gets activated by hydrochloric acid into pepsin and helps in digestion of protein. And secondly, prorenin, which is secreted in infants for the digestion of milk protein. Number four, orxantaphene cells. Orxantaphene cells are responsible for the secretion of serotonin. Number five, G cells. G cells are endocrine cells because they secrete hormone, and the name of that hormone is gastrin hormone. From the name itself, you might have able to determine the function of it. What's the function of gastrin hormone? Gastrin hormone is a local hormone. That is, this hormone controls the secretion of rest of these cells. These cells, they secrete enzymes or some kind of secretion, right? And the secretions of these cells are controlled by gastrin hormone. This gastrin hormone is secreted by G cells. Finally, there's basal cells. Basal cells are totipotent, that is, they can divide. They are the precursor of the rest of the cell. That means basal cells, they divide and then form these other cells. Let me revise it for you. Goblet cells, they secrete mucus, which forms the innermost lining of the stomach and protects the wall of the stomach from the harmful action of hydrochloric acid present inside the stomach. Oxantic or parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid has three major functions. Number one, to maintain acidic pH inside the stomach for the digestion of protein. Number two, to kill any type of germs or pathogens that have entered inside the stomach. And number three, to convert inactive pepsinogen into active pepsin, or inactive proteolytic enzymes into active proteolytic enzymes. Number four are your chief cells or chief cells or zymogen cells or peptic cells. They secrete pepsinogen and prorenin, which are inactive proteolytic enzymes. Pepsinogen is responsible for the digestion of proteins in general, and prorenin is responsible for the digestion of milk protein in infants. Then orxantaphene cells that secrete serotonin. These cells, they secrete some kind of secretion. G cells, they are endocrine in function because they secrete hormone. And the hormone that G cells secrete is gastrin hormone. And this gastrin hormone is responsible for the secretion of the enzymes by the rest of the cells. Basically, gastrin hormone controls all these cells for their respective secretions. Finally, there are basal cells that give rise to rest of the cells by dividing. As simple as that. So the content inside the stomach is known as gastric juice. Gastric juice. The volume of which is around 2 to 3 liters, and pH is around 1.2 to 1.8. So it's highly acidic, and that's due to the presence of hydrochloric acid. And acidic pH is required for the digestion of protein inside your stomach. So the gastric juice composition, what does it contain? It contains mucus secreted by goblet cells. It contains hydrochloric acid and Cassell's intrinsic factor secreted by oxantic cells. It contains pepsinogen as well as prorenin secreted by chief cells. It contains serotonin secreted by orxantaphene cells, and it contains gastrin secreted by G cells. So this is the composition of gastric juice. All this is going to be important under physiology of digestion and more specifically under digestion of protein. So see you there.